recently where I was the first author, and the irony of it all is that those group collages became like the basis of the argument of that paper. Like that data only existed because I was working with other people who thought differently from me, but that work that was produced by virtue of them conceptualizing research differently became a cornerstone of the way that I then approached analysis of focus group interactions. And so I can say without any hesitation whatsoever that my engagement with research has been enriched and has been bettered by working with people who don't understand research like me. Because like these ideas of like, you know, object-based research and collage and art-based research, it genuinely doesn't even occur to me to work that way. I would have done interviews, I would have done focus groups, that would have been what I would have done. And it would have been great, but it would not have been nearly as rich and valuable for the participants and for us as it ended up being because of these other perceptions from these other people.
Yeah, I think that one thing that has come out of our collaboration, and I think it's come out of other collaborations I've been part of, is that unexpected element of opening possibilities for other things to happen that you might not necessarily anticipate or expect. And so I think that is a great example of it, and that's really what we saw happening. And it allowed us to be open to thinking differently throughout the entire research process. So as we were doing, you know, interviews, I felt like I was invoking, you know, Dr. Shelton at times, you know, thinking about what would Dr. Shelton do, like right now, what would she say? Because I know, you know, she just has this very strong interviewing practice. So it was a really nice, it was a nice experience where we all just brought these different things to the table. And as we kind of set out to actually do the data generation, I think it bears noting that, you know, all three of us are very different people. At very different stages of life, with different, and not necessarily stages of life, but with different kind of outside of work obligations, right? And, you know, keeping in mind that even as we were treating Maureen as a colleague, she was writing a dissertation. And we also were very mindful of the fact that there were power dynamics always already at play there. You know, she was a student. And so we always tried to kind of like, I know we caught ourselves many times like stepping back and just being like, you know, okay, how do we need to broach this? You know, what's going on here? And so one thing that we did was when we scheduled the interviews, we divided them up. We took extra interviews. And then when we did the focus groups, we were at more of the focus groups than she was. So we wanted to give her the opportunity to like continue working on the work that she was doing, and also realizing that it's not always comfortable for a graduate student to step in, even as close as I think we all felt with each other. There's like this level of discomfort. Like, do you feel like you can advocate for yourself in that situation where you can say, I can't be there. My schedule is full. I have to work on my dissertation. And so we really tried to be mindful of that as we were kind of going through the process.
And working on that gender guilt too. I mean, it's
called out all the time.
it's true in general. I mean, as academics, we all of us constantly we're told like learn to say no. But especially when you're early in your trajectory as either a doctoral student or as like an early career faculty member, you're very inclined to say yes to a lot of things because you're afraid that people aren't going to ask you yet. You're afraid that if you say no, people are going to change their opinions of you. And so it was interesting because like Kelly and I fight that battle regularly just by virtue of like the ways that we've been acculturated within society and the ways that we've been taught to navigate the academy. But then we also had to like be the responsible adults when, you know, Maureen would have situations where like she couldn't show up to something or she just didn't have the energy and the bandwidth to do X, Y, or Z. And we would have to be really adamant about like, you don't owe an explanation. Like, it's okay that you can't do this thing. At the end of the day, it's not your responsibility. Your participation is very advantageous to us. It's important to this project, but like, you're not like, making sure that we were emphasizing for her, because that was a lot of the basis of a lot of the tears in our offices, was these people, women feeling like they weren't able to disengage when life required that they do so. And so it was sort of interesting that it very much became a practice what you preach sort of thing, because we really had to, with her and for her, so that she continued to feel connected to the project, because she absolutely was and is. But also making sure that she understood that like it was an invitation and a valued collaboration. It wasn't like an expectation for her. And being very mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, we get paid to do this work. Assistantships, even though she was our research assistant, we have not that long ago lived on assistantships. We know. And so, you know, there was also just, I mean, frankly, a socioeconomic disparity as well, with the fact that we were literally getting paid to do this work. And for her, it was a different sort of involvement. And so making sure that that was something that we all stayed mindful of. And we mention that because for some of you, if you get invited into projects, hopefully you'll have faculty members who are mindful of those things. But the academy, frankly, encourages you to dismiss and forget those aspects of it. And so it's important that if it gets dropped to the side, it becomes reintegrated into the conversation and into the collaboration. And there were also times when like we couldn't do things.
Well, I was just gonna say, like it fed into.
Right.
I mean, so throughout our collaboration, I was pregnant for the first 10 months of it, had a baby, came back with an infant.
She was a little busy.
I was a little but thanks to Stephanie, you know, she always reminded me that don't apologize. And you have a lot going on. Don't worry about it. And it was this like it was this moment when philosophy became life and life became philosophy. We're using these feminist theories that are informing the work that we're doing, and we had to practice what that would look like in real life, right? So there were times when, you know, something happened after 5 and I would just be like, I can't be there. And, you know, they're like, it's fine. And there were times when Stephanie would have an, you know, emergency at home, you know. So we always had to be mindful. We always were mindful of the ways that work life is not bounded. You know, when we leave this campus, we don't leave this campus. When we leave home, we don't leave home. You know, all of these things intersect and entwine and entangle with our daily experiences. And so for us, it was wonderful because you know, the philosophies and theories that we were working with aligned so well with the practices that we needed to undertake.
And it sounds really obvious, but unfortunately it's not standard practice. Like, research collaborations should be humanizing. And it was really nice to be in a situation where we were really called upon, like epistemologically, ontologically, to actually do that work. Because it definitely has informed future collaborations that I've engaged in by virtue of the work that we did with this project.
I did say 10 months because my baby was late. So I just want to make sure you know what the gestation period is for women. She was posting, so it was like 10 months. So we always negotiate. We always have these conversations, and from the very beginning, we had this plan of, okay, we're going to take turns taking the lead on papers, and that we wouldn't take the lead on papers that didn't make sense for us as scholars, you know, or in terms of like the theories that we were using.
Yeah, one thing that we talked about is it has been, and I suspect others of you have seen this as well. I have seen really good friendships deteriorate due to academic collaboration. And a lot of times it's because people think that personal friendships are sufficient to do academic work together. And I'm going to tell you, and you're welcome to disagree with me, that's fine, but I'm just going to insist that you're wrong. Because that like, being buds does not a quality academic collaboration make. And so I will say that one of the things that, so we're gonna we'll talk through like the process, and you're welcome to ask questions if like we don't answer things that we want to know about. But one of the things that's really important, and I think one of the things that was really integral to this collaboration working at all, is that I have a very steadfast rule that I only collaborate with people that I believe have a similar work ethic to me. And I will also say that this collaboration came after I'd already been here for a couple of years, because I very steadfastly resisted any form of collaboration the first 2 years I was here, because like I still did not even go to the grocery store without my GPS. Like I definitely didn't be trying to like, pick people I'm going to write with. And so work ethic has always been like a very strong foundation of ways that I choose who to work with. But then on top of that, like all parts of our collaborations have been very intentional and very explicit. There hasn't ever been something that's been like decided after the fact. When we engage with a project, we have a conversation about like, how would we approach this? What parts of the data seem to make sense for this project? Relative to those conversations, like who makes sense to take the lead on this thing? And I will also say that, like, you know, there are moments when someone will come and be like, this is, so one of the ones that Kelly took the lead on that just recently got accepted, it was something that someone had said in a focus group that just stuck with her. It wasn't something that necessarily rang bells for me, but it was important to Kelly, and it was something that reverberated over the course of the entire study for her, so it became the basis of the paper. And it made sense that Kelly would take the lead for that, because that was something that had resonated for her differently than it had resonated for Maureen or me. But another paper where I was a lead author, we actually started with just sort of this, like, it was a special issue call, and it was like, we just sort of sat around in Kelly's office and were like how would we approach this if we were to even write for this call? And as we sat there and had conversations, it became clear that, like, I use a lot of like queer theory, and the way that it really made sense to approach it was like this Muradian concept of like monstrous, grotesque queerness. And so then it was like, well, Stephanie, you're going to be the one who takes the lead on this one. And when we went into the office to talk about the project, that wasn't initially like the original assumption. But that's how it worked out, and so that's how it played out. But all those conversations are had ahead of time, so that way it's clear whose responsibilities are what. And then meanwhile, you know, if like I'm not, you know, taking first responsibility for a paper, like there's another project that like I'm beginning to navigate, negotiate, that's going to include the two of them. And so I will say that we have, as a collaborative group, including Maureen, done a very nice job, I think, of just being very deliberate and very explicit about who and about why. And then making sure that whoever is in charge of leading a particular project is very deliberate about communicating specific deadlines, communicating and sharing particular documents or drafts of manuscripts, asking explicitly for particular people to do particular things, because I know that like one paper, Maureen was much better suited to work on the literature review. It was about higher education. That's not my background, that's not my bag. But then when we got to like the methods and theory section, like it was like, Stephanie, like, you, like, please add to this and look over this. And so making sure that we know one another, we know what one another's strengths are, so that when people contribute, it is meaningful to everybody. And it's not just busy work or someone checking something off a to-do list.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the actual writing, when the distribution of work that happens in collaboration, it's really important to understand what it means to do first author work, what it means to do second author work, what it means to do third author work, and so on. And so that is something that I've learned both with working in very successful and effective collaborations, and also in collaborations that have not been so successful, because there's been a lack of communication. And so for us, it was really important to make sure that communication was really strong, and it happened in advance of starting the projects, but that it was a conversation that was continued throughout the projects. So we would sit down with our graduate students, or sit down with Maureen, or whoever we've been working with, and we make sure that, okay, as first author, this is what it looks like. Here are what the responsibilities look like. And here's what, if I were doing being the first author, here's what I'm going to do. And it could be kind of more abstract and vague, because you never know how the project will unfold, right? And so then like, okay, well, as second author, what do you think is acceptable? What do you think is appropriate for you to take on? And so we would have that conversation, and we would go through that with each of our projects. And then realizing that as processes unfold, as projects unfold, they shift and change, that it's not always going to happen the way that you expect and predict it to happen. It's really the nature of qualitative research anyways. And so that conversation continues throughout the process. So it's a conversation that happens through, midway through. Is this still working? How's this going? You've got all these other things going on right now. Why don't you take a break, and me as lead author, I'll take a little more responsibility here. Or, Stephanie, you as third author, I think this is a good time for you to kind of step in and start doing some editorial reading, right? And so we would have that conversation at the beginning, we have that conversation in process, and then it's something that we revisit at the end. And luckily we haven't really necessarily had to, because it's been very clear who's contributed what. But I know in other collaborations that I've been part of, it's been very important for me, especially when I'm working with graduate students, to sit down and say, how do we feel about the authorship? We had said that so-and-so is first, so-and-so second, so-and-so third, so-and-so fourth. In looking at what we all did, does that still make sense? And this is a conversation that typically happens before you send it out for publication. And sometimes it's even a conversation that happens after you've done some revised and resubmits. Because there have been times where a person has had to step off during the revision process. And where another person has stepped in and done significant revisions to the point where it actually changed their contribution to the paper. So I think it's really important, it's been really important for me in collaborations in this project in particular, that conversation continues to happen. But I also think that, many of you being graduate students, is something that you think about as you start to collaborate with both peers and with faculty, that conversation, isn't just like one that happens at the beginning, that it's a continuous, or something that's continuously revisited.
Because Kelly is such an organized person.
I know you're all shocked.
I'm much more of a flag.
I'm one that made the agenda.
Yeah, it's a really nice agenda. I appreciate, because I'm not a naturally organized human. We are differently organized. That's nice. It's like alternative facts. Differently organized. It's a t-shirt. But one of the things that Kelly had noted that we need to talk about, and I totally agree, is challenges with collaboration, because we have had a very positive, very productive, very meaningful collaboration through this project. So when Mona reached out and was like, is there any way you can talk about collaboration? We were like, well, in fact, which is really great. But I mean, even in a project like this, there's still challenges and points of renegotiation relative to. And so talking through that, yeah, for sure. And I know that there were some that you want to talk about. I will say within this project itself, I felt very heavily my lack of understanding and ability relative to the arts-based component. One of the things that we would do is the women who were the participants would bring objects to their individual interviews, and they would talk about how that object encompassed their doctoral experiences, why they had brought it, and then that object would factor into a group collage they would do later as a large focus group. And I mean, even just really small things, like taking an actual picture of the object, I would just be like, I suck. My pictures would just be awful. And then Maureen and Kelly would have to go in with their artsy background and fix my junk, basically. Or in the paper where I was the first author that integrated the collages themselves. Finally, I just had to be like, Kelly, I don't know how to make these objects look right in this paper. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was just, it was super simple, but it's I don't know how to make it work, make it go. And so Kelly had to fix it in 2 minutes after I had worked on it for 2 days. But it's one of those things where I absolutely knew my limitations, and I also knew that other people had strengths that I did not have. And then even through the IRB process, Maureen was very practiced with, things like the flyer that we sent out and so on and so forth. I like playing with stuff like that, but I'm not super great at it. And so just like being like, I'm gonna defer to you because I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm like a wrecking ball.
Excel spreadsheets, and that's not.
Yes, Excel spreadsheets.
But they saved our lives.
They were so organized. Like she was up spreadsheets like all the various participants and their interview days, and I'm just like.
So if it had just been the two of us, like who knows?
I wouldn't have shown up to have.
We definitely deferred.
I'm sure.
Well, then with your paper, I had read Barad. We used Karen Barad, but I didn't know. I had read some of the work that was more focused on queer theory and how that informs her practice of kind of post-humanism, new materialism, or whatever. So theoretically, it was challenging for me because I was kind of I felt like I half a step behind. Like I was reading it and then we were talking about it, and Stephanie would be like, "Oh, but it's this," and then it would just be, "Oh, you're right." So yeah, theoretically, I felt like it was challenging, but it was nice because I knew that obviously that was her wheelhouse, and she could bring that knowledge to the paper.
Yeah, that was definitely a challenge. Just knowing moments when I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. If it was interview or focus group, I felt like I had it. But if it was veering off into these other areas, because there were moments when for whatever reason, Kelly couldn't show up because, of childcare, or Marlene couldn't show up because life, right? And so then I'm just like, I don't know what the hell to do with this art stuff. Like, I'm supposed to do something. What if I do it wrong? They're gonna be so mad. And of course they never were, but there would just be moments when I'm just like, I don't know how to make it work.
But you also knew you articulated that.
Yes.
So that that communication I think was really important.
And I think it's important for everybody in collaborations. Like if there's something that you've been asked to do that you don't know how to do, just because I feel like doctoral work, especially, and particularly when you're a doctoral student or a career faculty member, but in general, like academia, it really almost requires that you be a poser to some respect. Like you don't want to say you don't know how to do something because then you're worried that people are going to think that you're dumb. And I'm just going to tell you, I move through life readily owning when I don't know how to do something. And sometimes I think probably other people would alter opinions because I'd just be like, I don't want to do it. But in collaboration, I think that's really important. Just be like, I don't want to do it. And I will tell you, almost any time there's some sort of image-based, arts-based, I don't know what to do. I need for you to make it work right.
I think as a doc student, it's really hard to say that to a faculty member that you don't know how to do something.
And I would do that all the time with my advisor. I mean, this is you're talking about other collaborations. So one of the collaborations that I really didn't have a whole lot of choice in when I was a doc student was collaborating with my dissertation chair, with my major professor. And there were moments when, and I will also say as an aside that he had Asperger's, and so there was no filter. And that's important simply because there were moments when things he would do or say would be really hurtful. And I have to remind myself he's not being an ass, he's just being himself, right? But there were moments when I just had to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what this is. And for the most part, there were moments when he was just how do you not know? And I'm just well, I don't. But for the most part, he was just oh, my apologies. You're right, I never talked about that or whatever. And so I will say that you're right. And as a doc student, it is intimidating and it is fear-inducing to say to someone that has because then you're worried are they gonna uninvite me from this project? They're gonna decide that I'm too dumb to collaborate or whatever. And the answer is no. If anyone is that fickle, then you don't want to work with them anyway. That's just what I want to say about that. But for the most part, even with his unfilteredness, he was just oh yeah, all right, well let's talk about that. And so I learned a lot that I was never going to learn in a classroom space because I was just I don't know how to do it. And those of you who have in classes can attest, no apologies as a class policy. You're not allowed to apologize. But the other thing is being really adamant about if you have a question, you need to ask it. Because the fact is, if you've got a question, somebody else has probably got the same question. And I cannot tell you, and all of you can attest to this, I'm sure, but at various points in your lives, you've not asked questions. And then retrospectively, you realize nobody else understood either. It was just that nobody was willing to say it. And so now I'm just I don't know, then I'm confident I don't know, and maybe somebody else doesn't know, but I'm about to not know all by myself if that's what's necessary. I don't know. And so, being very, very frank, because you're not aiding the collaboration if you're not able to participate in the ways that are necessary. And so if you don't know, and if you feel uncomfortable, because I will say that I did talk to a doctoral student at one point relative to the study starting, and she felt very intimidated by her advisor. She felt that he absolutely did not understand the reality of what it meant to care for her daughter and not to have childcare and so on. And finally, I'm just like, you're gonna have to say that. You're gonna have to say that, because there's no way that he's gonna be able to read your mind and know that. And just based on his own personal experiences, there's no way he's gonna experience that to the point where he's gonna just get it. And so she finally, womaned up and had a conversation with him, and he was just like, oh my God, thank you so much. And so it was a good lesson for her, but it was a reminder to me that the majority of the time, people just don't realize that we don't know something, but we have to articulate that. And that's an important part of doing collaboration.
Well, Stephanie was touching on something that we thought was really important to bring up today, and knowing that there were some graduate students here, and that is what collaboration, how to approach collaborations as a graduate student, especially when you're working with people who are, faculty, for instance, or people that are maybe ranked higher than you in some sort of, weird, hierarchy, right? And so one thing that we have talked about a little bit is my experience as a graduate student, because I was a graduate research assistant on an NSF. NSF, thanks for coming. And so I was working with people, I was from the arts, but I was working with people from engineering who were the leads on the project, the PIs. And I realized very quickly that the way that I think and the way I do things was very different from a disciplinary standpoint than the way that they did. And it was a really great learning experience for me, because it forced me to understand that there were these disciplinary differences. And it was my responsibility as a collaborator, even as a graduate student, to learn what the norms were for them, so that I could be a successful and effective graduate research assistant / collaborator for the project. But there were times when it did not always go well. And so there were times when there were not things that were communicated, or there were misunderstandings. And a lot of those misunderstandings and miscommunications centered around disciplinary differences. So somebody coming from the arts and humanities, somebody interacting with folks who are much more kind of science-oriented, the way that, for instance, authorship works is very different. And so I had no idea about the lab norms. If you're a PI, you're on the paper. Whether or not you write the paper, you're on the paper. I did not know that. I didn't know that all the people involved in a project, typically if you're doing lab work, get some sort of authorship, right? And so I was having to navigate that as someone who was coming from the arts and somebody who was also writing a dissertation that was within this bigger project, trying to figure out what's mine, what's not. And it kind of resulted in a really challenging conversation on scholarly ownership. And we had to kind of sit down and we had to talk about what these disciplinary differences were, and then to a realization that they had certain expectations of knowledge that I had that I didn't have. And so that was, at times it was really challenging, even as it was really wonderful to be able to work with people who thought differently, who, we could kind of bring these different strings to it and different perspectives. It was a really generative collaboration. It was very fruitful for me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it was really challenging. I became very aware of power. I became very aware of disciplines. And so as a graduate student, it was a challenging space for me to navigate. And so, we want to acknowledge that, as graduate students, so you may find yourselves in these types of situations, and they can be challenging. And the most important thing is to own when you don't know something, and to create those conversations, to make sure that they happen, so that you don't end up in a position where you're miserable, or when when things are just happening and you feel out of control, or you're not feeling like you're valued. And so those are real challenges and real risks with collaboration, but almost all of them can be solved by starting that conversation and making sure that communication is happening throughout the process. Mm-hmm. And then I was in another, Stephanie knows this, another funny collaboration experience that I've had was with a colleague. And I kind of knew it was going to be a challenge because we don't have the same work ethic, but at the same time we had this great idea for a paper, and we really wanted to write it. It was hard. We got through it, but it was just a reminder too that sometimes you enter into collaborations understanding and knowing that there are going to be challenges, and you just have to kind of suck it up and do it. And we did, and it was a great paper, but it also was a reminder that good friends do not good collaborations necessarily make. So we do, I think we still are friends, but it was definitely a challenging collaboration.
And it's also, I do a good bit of collaboration with teachers, with people who are outside of academia. And I often write with them. And there have been moments that I have vented to Kelly because their priorities and their understandings of things like deadlines are very different. Like, for them, publication is this novel, cool thing they get to do. For me, publication is like, I have to do it. And so we'll get a revised resubmit that has a deadline, and then it's like, all right, so I'm going to do this, blah, 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 can you please do this by blah, 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 blah. And, oh, sure, yeah, whatever. Well, stuff gets busy, right? Because, I used to be a high school teacher. I know what that life is like. But, they would forget, or, it wouldn't be as urgent as, the student standing in front of them, which is completely legitimate. But it's something that each time I enter into one of those collaborations, I have to remind myself, this is teamwork that is involving people that are literally playing on very different teams. And so in many of those cases, I simply have to accept that although they are essential to the collaboration, at the end of the day, it's really going to be me doing the heavy lifting, because that's what's fair. In those situations, because this is my job. It's simply something that they're interested and willing to do. And so those are probably the most challenging collaborations, because they have different priorities. They have different understandings of what publication means. For them, it's cool. For me, it's cool too, but it's a different kind of cool. And so just I have to remind myself sometimes, it is not reasonable to expect them to work with me the way that I would, Kelly, for example. And so for me, those are the ones where I have to I have to check myself. And that's something for you to think about relative to where your trajectories might take you in the future. Because if you're going to do work that involves people outside of academia, and actually I do a good bit of work, I've written a good many papers with a friend who is, she is a lobbyist for trans rights. And she is more academically inclined than the teachers that I work with, but her schedule is very different from mine. And there have been moments when things like homelessness have prevented her from having access to a computer, and it just wasn't reasonable to ask her to participate in the collaboration in the way that I could go and ask Kelly or Maureen, for example, to do. And so just being very aware of the ways that life matters, and the ways that different people's realities and professional responsibilities are going to shape what they're able and willing to do.
And I think very rarely in collaborations, it does happen though, you'll work with somebody that can help you advocate for yourself, and I think that our collaboration has done that, but in most situations that's not the case. So you have to advocate for yourself. If something's going on, if you need something, if, whatever it is, you have to advocate for yourself. And especially as a graduate student, you have to kind of say what you need to say.
And you have to be really honest about yourself and other people too. I have a dear friend, wickedly smart. She's incredibly productive herself. We have a lot of overlap in our scholarship. I will never write with her. because I just don't think that we would, like, I don't think our friendship would survive. I don't think that it would be a positive experience for either of the two of us. I think that we would have this really amazing kick-ass paper, and then that would be the end of all communication we would ever have, ever. And that part of that is just being very, very honest about who I am and about the ways that I understand who she is. And so sometimes even if a collaboration is a good idea, it's not a good idea.
How do you navigate that though, right? Like, I mean, it's even if you know that this is the case, your friend comes to you and says, we should do this, you know.
She has, and you know, and I have just been like, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, earlier in our careers, I would be like, well, like right now it's not a good idea, right? Like it would be like the more passive aggressive. But now I'm just like, I don't think that's not a good idea. That's not good for us. And I mean, and now like she's in a space too where she's just like, yeah, you're probably right. And I'm like, no, I am. I mean, like, especially because she and I went through our doctoral program together too. And we were a very publish or perish department. Like that was the culture of the space that I came out of as a doc student. And so like people are in their first year of their doc program worrying about publishing, which is not normal and not healthy, just for the record. But like we would all almost be desperate for like collaborating with other people, and frankly, it's a miracle of whoever's in charge of the higher powers of the universe that like we didn't end up doing that first year because we were such good friends. But you know, over time, I think both of us even unconsciously realized like it was not a great idea, and now, you know, I think we're very able to reflect, like we know who we are as academics now because we both have like moved through a career at this point. Not that we're like old, but like we have a clear idea of like who we are and how we produce scholarship. And so, I mean, now it's just a very frank, like I don't think it's a good idea, because she's mentioned it a couple of times since we both graduated and moved into tenure track positions, and I'm just like, no. But then there's another person that like she and I didn't write together as doc students, but I'm just like, we need to do that, and so we did. I think part of it is just being very honest about who you are and who other people are, because it's one of those like you can't put the lightning back in the bottle kind of things. I'm glad you and that person stayed friends.
Oh.
I don't think she and I would.
How do you all navigate when you're collaborating with different writing styles? So if you like...
Oh, we have very different writing styles, I think.
And like I envision like
But it worked.
You both and Maureen, and while I can see the alignment, it's also like when you go to put these pieces together in one manuscript, how do you make it all flow or like agree on what the tone is?
We have very different writing styles. Maureen and I have very similar writing styles. So that has been a little bit easier. But yeah,
I'm the problem.
No, you're not the problem. No, it's been great. But see, I think it's actually been really wonderful because she's helped me see things like in the one that I took lead on that I didn't see, or helped me think about language or tone differently. So I don't like it just kind of happens. You know, I find that like when I read, so when the one you took the lead on, I would read what Stephanie had written, and then my additions or my revisions would try to stay consistent, stay faithful to that tone that she had established, but also making sure that it had a little bit of me in there too. Mm-hmm. And I don't like, I mean, there's not really a good like step by step, like it just kind of worked.
I think in the paper where you were the lead author, I was the third author on that paper, and so there were sections that that Kelly produced as first author. There were other sections that were far more substantial than what I produced from Maureen as second author, and their writing styles are very similar, but there's still obvious differences. And so at times, like my role as third author was to come through and basically clean the manuscript. And make sure that there was like a unified, you know, sort of language tone. The syntax was consistent, et cetera. And so like, I mean, so that's one of the roles that one of the authors can specifically have is like cleaning, because I know for that manuscript that was often because she and Maureen would go back and forth about X, Y, or Z. And then it would be my job to come in And some of my questions were things like, I don't understand this isn't clear. Like when you're using this theoretical term, like based on what's written, I don't understand it. But then there were other moments when I'm just like my comments would be things like, I'm changing this sentence because it aligns better with all of the other sentences in this section. And so like I would explain why I was making changes, but that was also part of my role, was like to clean everything.
Yeah, usually whoever's been third author, that's kind of been their role. But yeah, it can be challenging, and that is also why you should find people that are more similar than different. Even as we do write differently, there's enough similarity to where I think where it worked.
Well, and respect for what the other one does relative to writing, because I mean, I don't write like Kelly. I don't engage with theory like Kelly, but I respect the work that Kelly does. So then there's an intentionality and a desire on my part to preserve those elements when I am going through and being like the cleaner, if you will.
Yeah, it sounds like also that there's a strategic way you all scaffold the whole process. Like I feel like some of the projects I've been on, it's been more so like you're all your own island, and then eventually we just throw it all together into one manuscript. It's like you go do the intro, you go do the results, like we'll talk about the implications maybe later, like, and then so when we sit down and put it all together, it doesn't sound the same because
it's a Frankenstein's monster.
Right, it's three of us writing different things, and I like the idea of maybe the first author is what takes the first piece of writing by this date, and then every subsequently. Yeah,
that's been our consistent MO, if you will. Like the first author's typically been the one to like build the skeleton. I'm going to use the Frankenstein's monster thing. That's very Baradian. The first author's been the one to basically like build the form of the monster. And then this is also sort of Deleuzian in some respects as well. And then like second and third author would like come in and start to like put the organs in, if you will. But then somebody's got to have the job of sewing everything up.
Well, we had lots of conversations before we actually started writing. So I think we all had an idea of not only like where we were going with it, but what our theoretical framework was going to be, what kind of the general like tone was, and in terms of
somebody's taking notes during these conversations too. That's important.
Maureen typically, but yeah, we would, and actually whoever was talking, like another person would jump in and take notes. So we would just kind of take turns. But yeah, we would have lots of conversations so that when the writing actually started, we had an idea about where we're going. So we can think about that one paper that we are right now is very much in limbo. We're working on this paper right now that is not moving anywhere, and so we were having a conversation last week of like, we don't know where we're going.
What we gonna do with this paper?
We've got to take a step back. We all have to come together. We've got to figure out. So we have an idea of like we collectively have an idea of how we can contribute. So we're realizing that it's stalled. We were realizing like how we can like jumpstart it back. So that happens too. Like it's not always, rainbows and butterflies. It's like, oh, we're gonna have this great brainstorming session, then we're all gonna go write it. It's all gonna come together beautifully. This is a real life like stuck moment that we're having with the paper that we've got to kind of figure out. And so that means that we've got to sit together. We've got to find a time to talk, and we've got to figure out a way to move it forward.
Yep.
And so I think that this is a good transition into like one thing we want to talk about was how to make collaborations work for you. And so some things that we've already mentioned, but maybe bear repeating, are that one of the most important things for us has been really accentuating. Thank you. People's strengths.
See, that's good collaboration.
That's good collaboration. She knows I can't talk, so she talks for me.
Straight practice to talk.
Very good at talking. And so that is, has been a big part of the project that we have undertaken together, but we think it's really important in any collaborative venture that you understand what each person is bringing to the collaboration, and that not only you know what they can do, but that you allow them to do it. You create a space for them to use those strengths.
But you trust them to be able to deliver on those strengths, because there are plenty, y'all all know folks who talk a really good game, but when it comes down to like doing the work, it's like, this is a mess. And so making sure that in those collaborations, you know what people's strengths are relative to what they're actually able to deliver. Because doc students, especially by virtue of this facade that you're almost encouraged to have, a lot of times doc students will talk a really big game, because I know that was definitely a norm in my department, but then like the actual delivery would be quite different sometimes because what they were able to describe was very different from what they were able to actually like create. And so being very honest about your own strengths and being very honest and reflecting on what other people's strengths are.
And that means that every collaboration is going to look different.
Yes.
So if you're collaborating, not only, and even with the same people,
Yep.
because life changes, people change, like things, nothing is static. So especially when you're working with other people, but also when you're working with the same people, it's always a negotiation. What can they do right now? What can they bring right now in this moment? And so I think that feeds into our second point, which is this idea of sharing the spotlight. So we think that the best collaborations are those when everyone can feel successful. And so that for us has been, and by the nature of our work being assistant professors on the tenure track, has meant being able to share first authorship, because that's a measurable success in our world as we try to think about kind of being tenured, right? And so so what is that spotlight? What does that success look like for you and the members of your collaboration? It may not be first authorship, it may be something different. So think about what that means and how you can make sure that each person feels like that they're a contributor and that they're supportive and that they're valued in the collaboration. Because if people don't feel valued, it's going to be a collaboration that just kind of dissipates and dies, potentially. And
it's a lot easier to be second or third chair, to use a music analogy, if you know that eventually you're going to be first chair or you're going to have the solo, than to just feel like you're just going to be in perpetual like second chair, third chair mode. And then, we also like, in addition to papers, like we've selected particular conferences that we wanted to focus relative to our scholarship and so on. And, different conferences or different priorities for each of us for different reasons. And so making sure that, we think about those, we consider those, et cetera. And there have been moments when like the authorship of the paper will be different from the authorship of a conference paper, even though it's basically the same data, simply because that's what's appropriate. Because of life, because of like a reconceptualization of the paper for any number of reasons, but like,
the focus of the conference.
Yeah, exactly. Just being very frank and open and honest about like what you are able to do and what you need to do, but also just like I think it's a lot easier to take turns if like that you're going to get to be the line leader.
Yeah. And because of that, I think culture that we've created, it's a lot easier for someone like for Stephanie to be like, well, I'm on 4 other papers right now. I can't take on another first. Like I need to be second or third. And so sometimes it's knowing when to step back. And like sometimes it's just like literally like my life, my schedule can't take that at this particular moment. So it's just something that we continue to think about as we move through the project.
Yep. And then one of the other items is like this idea of communication. Kelly put it as communicate, and I think that's right. But like just like it's one of those things where I think a lot of times there's this like mind reading expectation in academia, and it's not real. If any of us were mind readers, we would be billionaires and we would not be in academia. The end. And so making sure that you're having frank conversations with people. And like this paper that we're stuck on, we just like the other day we were both walking to the parking deck and we're just like, what are we doing with this paper? And it's like, I don't know either. But just being able to like go and be like, hey, I read the revisions, I don't get it. I know that you tagged me to do this, but I don't know that I'm able to do what you're asking me to do. Look, I read this thing, but I've been reading this book, and like I really think that this could be a very important addition to what we're doing. And so communicating that, and then like the other person like hearing that and entertaining it, not just being like, it's my paper, you can't add this thing, or this is something I do not know, stranger danger kind of thing.
It's not unidirectional.
Yes.
It flows both ways in collaboration.
It's multi-directional, and it's iterative, to use a qual word, right? It's iterative, but for real, not just like, because people write that in their manuscripts all the time, and I'm like, that's what an iterative. Using fancy words. And then deadlines, being very clear with deadlines.
And abiding by them.
Yes.
Setting them and following through with them.
And understanding generally that if you're the first author, like that really, that's like one of your big jobs. Like that really is like, that's your job. But if you're not the first author, like understanding what the deadlines are and understanding what it is you've been asked to deliver by X day. And if you can't, saying so.
Yeah. Because there was a time recently when I emailed them and I was like, y'all, I'm done. Here's what I need for you to do. And I realized that, it was right before the winter break. And as I realized that we're on winter break, I realized that like, I would like to have it done now, but I also realized that this might not be convenient for you. So you let me know what works for you. And so, even as I was anxious to like get it done, get it out, I also had to remind myself like, all right, this may not be realistic for me to have these expectations.
Because my response was, my family lives in a very rural area, and I'm like, Kelly, I'm not gonna have internet. I'm not gonna have internet. Yeah. So I can't do this that you were asking of me. I am sorry.
And it was fine. Because our final thing that we wanted to say is to be a good collaborator and to be a kind person. So, just practicing kindness, you're working with people, not with like little robots, people have feelings and we're humans and you need to communicate effectively and communicate kindly and understand that even as sometimes we set very firm deadlines, somebody gets sick or somebody's dog gets sick or somebody's kid's sick. Or somebody has a baby. There are things, real life things that happen. And so if we can't practice kindness in moments like that, then, that collaboration is kind of doomed from the start.
Yep. You want a speed date?
Let's speed date.
Okay, all right. So as Kelly and I thought about like what we might do, we were reminded of the middle school years where you would get the little folded up note. Some of you might.
Well, this is inspired by Valentine's Day.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Or any time.
A lot of you may be too young. You may be too young for this, but like the little folded up note.
Or
or international. In which case you were spared from this ridiculousness.
Yeah.
But it's like you used to get like little folded up notes, and it's like, do you like me? Check yes or no. And then the worst would be like when somebody would like write in like maybe. So that's actually how these are meant to work. So thanks. And so there's 3 columns. One is just who you're talking to. And then the next is just like what you've learned from them, maybe their contact information if you find that collaborating with them could be productive. And then the last is just a note, like a very honest, because again, it goes back to like being honest, a very honest note about whether or not this is actually a good match. Yeah, to yourself. Like you're not sharing this with them, they don't have to know. You're not going to prom with them. If y'all, those of you who've been in my class, you already know this is gonna work. But if y'all would like find yourself like a starting partner, and then you're gonna rotate and meet new people.
With the idea that you may not find a collaborator here, but
fine.
You may be able to go and be like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so in whatever department.
Yeah.
Like that, y'all need to connect because you're doing similar things.
You could give them that information.
Yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, so-and-so and so-and-so does blank, whatever it is. All right, so Honorine and Nancy, since you're the only 2 who aren't paired, I'm gonna tell you you're married now. Bye, Carl, thank you for coming. But it's not gonna last long. These are not gonna be very long relationships.
They're not long days.
There's gotta be some really messy divorces soon, like finding the dogs. All right, so we're gonna give you like maybe like 2 minutes each. That way it's not like a super long time, like you're not, like this is not an actual date.
You're not invoking your escape plan?
Right.
Yeah.
It's gonna be quick. So tops of 2 minutes each, and we're gonna see if that feels too long, and then it may go down to 1 minute each. But yeah, so 2 minutes. For first person, y'all like first decide who's number 1. Like do that so that we're not wasting time doing that. Everybody got like a number 1 who's going first? You can paper, rock, scissors for it. I don't care. Yeah? Okay. All right. First person, you're just talking about who you are, what your research interests are, and the other person's jotting things down as it's of interest to them. All right. So ready, go.
then I didn't think it's kind of
I'm gonna put this up on the table.
Do you like it?
so I'm a grad student.
You are?
In psychology. And my research interest is always the background of especially English language learning.
Oh, can I help? Yeah. Sarah Home, I think, texted me. In town for the weekend over the night. I wonder if they have the same spring breakups. I don't know if I have it in my calendar. March 9th.
Basically what I'm interested in.
No, ours is the next one.
All right, one more minute for the first person.
She wants to see everybody.
So you fold it in half and then you stick the piece through. And make it 2.
Oh, I don't know the last time I had it. They're cute. Wait, leave that.
2 of them, yeah.
Okay,
2
I
of them
gotcha.
go in.
I gotcha.
I'm now Nancy Holmes. Okay. Holmes, H-O-M-E-S.
All right, 30 seconds for the first person.
Oh, we're still, you can see.
Yeah, it's fine. Y'all are done. It's fine.
I'm interested in basic you are balancing life, doctoral studies, and full-time employment. And specifically, I'm looking at in the field of educational leadership.
That's one for everybody, right?
So,
Oh, yeah. All right, well, I'm gonna make these.
you
can make one for your mom.
degree.
Oh my gosh.
I'm in the dissertation process. Please, kind of focus on women. Yes.
Okay, you have to switch to the second person, switch to the second person.
Yes, but also because the experiences of premature women are very different than somebody who's like 30 years old.
Wait, are they moving?
Are they? You're still. I think 1 minute per person is actually going to be fine.
Okay.
So
Ooh, these smell so good.
yeah.
You know,
Oh, they do.
Here, you can take one.
Oh no, please
Do you like
don't
dark
force me.
anything.
Twist my arm.
No. I'm just gonna say she's like, Mommy, you got dark chocolate. I was like, yeah, they're not good. Free.
Jesus, why am I struggling so hard?
Most of the research
I was going to do one for Emerson.
Oh.
say 30 plus. So there's nothing focused really on women that say, and also
All right, 1 more minute. 1 more minute.
self-efficacy is now, how far along are you?
I tore that one.
Second year.
I know, I almost did the first one. There's a lot of preparation.
Coursework.
So I guess you can like.
Oh, you can make a little stand. That's what that is. It's a little stand.
OMG! Let's see what that looks like. Oh no, it's an arrow! Oh, we should have done that. That's cute.
Well, you're in higher ed, but educational leadership
how
is really what I'm focused on. So
cute.
like higher
Look,
education,
we'll make this one for Emerson.
instructional leadership, so basically.
All right, start to find a stopping point now already.
Persistent degree in those things. This for me?
Okay, it's been a messy breakup, it's not working, you're angry, you fought over who's gonna get the house, and you're meeting a new person.
You're ready to move on.
Yeah, you're ready to move on. Moving on. Moving on.
Oh, yes, great. Hi, I'm Mona. You want to go first? I can. Okay. So my name's Nancy Holmes.
Nancy Holmes. Okay.
So I am.
Look how cute.
Oh, okay. And so.
In what department?
Higher ed.
Higher ed, okay.
And so anyway, my focus, and this is what I'm doing my research on, or my dissertation on, is the experiences of midlife women. Okay. And that would be 40 to 65. And how, so to, they're also employed and working on their doctoral, completed their doctoral
I had nightmares
degree.
last night about everything
so
that
I want to
happened
know how they
in
persisted to degree.
situation
And basically, it's
class.
work-life balance. And many of the things they've been talking is just that I'm very interested in midlife women because the experiences of midlife women are far different than somebody say who's in their early 30s. Maybe they're having kids, or having children and all. Whereas midlife women really we're dealing with, maybe a death or elderly parents or spouse that might be
Say
ill
things
or
that like just
their own
alienate
health.
everyone
So
in the
there's some
class,
really
and, like, there are
different
very few
experiences
people that I think really are
people going
willingly
back to
engage with
school
them.
because they want to do something different with their careers. So anyway, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, it's just like
Gotcha, but very specifically in the
crazy
context
dreams
of
and nightmares and stuff.
EDD or
PhD.
educational leadership.
Okay, first person can finish up and switch to the second person, let them have a turn.
So they'll tell you about
I am a PhD student in the same department as theirs.
So it's like a whole thing.
I'm not involved though. I'm in insight. I'm more on the neuroscience side of the insight part. So what I study is how I'm on the other side. So you're studying women. I'm studying children. And teenagers, that kind of thing. And I'm looking at people who are English language learners and how they learn that compared to people who only speak English language. So that's the research I do.
And how they learn math.
Like I told Erica, I don't know what your plans are for school tomorrow, but
Yeah, so basically,
this is like a 2-hour preparation,
like your procedure class, right?
So you may want to
assumption you make is math is a new subject. The
What does she
assumption you
want
make
to
is
do?
I'm going to teach you whatever in this language, right? The assumption you're making is everybody
actually
understands
great thing about, like,
language at the same proficiency.
she's
But
like,
what
it's a
if
hand-me-down
you're
dress
home and you're speaking all day, every day Chinese or Korean or whatever, right? Like English is not your first language, right? You don't have a good grasp on it. You come to school,
look, there we go.
and now you're learning a very difficult subject in a language you don't even understand, right? And then you're challenging. Yeah, your whole life trajectory is based on it, right? Because it's such a statement, of your achievement and all of these kinds of things. And so consistently you're hearing
it
that.
says April 2019, so sure.
Okay, find a stopping point if you haven't already. And then you're gonna meet your last person.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I think, right, that
Yes.
Yeah, you're breaking up again. Didn't work out
I
good.
know.
It's not you, it's them. It's not you, it's them.
totally serious.
We did think about like that.
I'm Laura.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Honor and came in like 30 minutes early. So we just wanted to
Sure.
my research involves fostering creativity in the undergraduate classroom, specifically for Generation Z. Looking at maybe science practices on that, as well as some alternative practices. Generation Z is the most creative generation coming into as college freshmen. So it's about the mid-90s. It's been dropping.
Right.
And there's about 15 years of them coming through. So we won't have problem solvers in the work world.
Yes.
We can't capture the population here and figure out how to solve that for them. And specifically working through the visual arts as a medium for this. It's a different way of articulating as opposed to the physicality of music, dance,
Right. And how far along are you? Are you already complete with your?
No, I am in the executive EDD program. So we are in our penultimate semester. We have one more semester of classes. So
almost
should be starting in the late summer. We have our chairs. We probably some classes and comps of what stands between us and
That's right, we discussed it.
So we were looking at, because I'm on the exec committee, we were looking at the agenda from that year to figure out like.
I am.
So I'm
Transition to the second person?
working on the dissertation. I'm also in the ED program, but to the, on campus. So I'm starting my 5th year. So my
Starts at 6, and then just for like 15 minutes or whatever.
basically
6:30. So you have like a
women
little time
between 40
like right after
and
lunch,
65
midlife. For like
midlife.
it ends at 9, so we have a user
No, I think I'm doing the same. I was
Doctoral studies and life and how they persist with 2 degrees. So that I will be interviewing at all women who've already completed their degree. I want to know what helped them to be successful. So from a practitioner standpoint, I want to be able to help faculty and administrations understand the needs of mature women. Because our experience, yes, well, they could be second career, but I think it's so many times, like even in the literature, we'll say 30 plus. It doesn't go specifically toward the 40 to 65 range, and I'm really interested in that because if you have a doctoral student who's in their 30s to 40s, they may start to have families and things like that. But when you have like maybe dealing with children or death or a spouse that's sick or grandkids or children returning to the home, there's a sandwich generation. Yeah, absolutely. And so their experiences are really different than younger doctoral studies, and there's really not much in the literature for that specific group. So I'm really interested in it. And it'll also be in educational leadership fields.
All right, start to find a stopping point.
As our code said, we have that range. We have the Gen X people, but we also have millennials, and start to see how each of their lifestyles affect how they approach things. And even now, we deal with technology. We're all in group me all the time. A lot of their millennials' big thing is, or complaints is about grades aren't in. I'm like, she's so panicked. The evidence are like, we've got other stuff we've got to deal with.
Well, and it's also a lot of education, especially in the field of education, are returning later in life to become a principal or to go into some sort of administration. And technology has changed, how we use libraries, how we do all those things. Everything's at our fingertips, but when I was in school, we were punch card down in the bottom of big goods. So, it's a very different experience, but that's really what it is. That's really good. I'm hoping it will.
All right. Stopping point. Some of you have better breaks than others. I'm just going to say.
Arlene.
Did we get shot to everybody?
Didn't you?
No.
Oh,
I think
There's one more match.
One more. All right. Okay. One more match.
Oh, 2 more?
Oh, 2 more. Oh, yeah. That's right. So, all right. You're shifting again. Sorry, my apologies. I'm not very spatially inclined.
I'm good.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. My name's Andrea.
Andrea, I'm Nancy. Nice to meet you. You want to go first?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm in the counselor ed department. My research interests include school counselor advocacy, specifically school counselor, or specifically how state policies impact school counselors' ability to LGBTQ students at the secondary level, so middle school, high school.
I'm sorry, you said middle school and high school?
Uh-oh.
It's just
Okay.
do we mess up the pattern?
Do you guys have?
Yes, we
Oh,
have.
you have, and you have to?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so who haven't y'all paired with?
We haven't.
Okay.
We haven't, yes. But Moni and I have.
No? Just us.
I'll get in touch.
So,
all right. So then maybe we do this. Why don't we strive to see if we'll see if y'all have questions. We'll see what questions you have, and then the time that's left, those of you who haven't matched up could meet up.
Okay.
And that way people who don't still have people that they need to meet up with, like, are not just like sitting around breathing.
Breathing is good sometimes. Breathing is good.
So how far along are you?
I'm in my second year.
Second year.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna give you like a handful of seconds to just sort of get your brains back in the game, and then think about like what questions you might have, and then we will answer them as candidly as we are able.
And then you can keep chatting.
Yeah, and then you can chat and ignore us, and we will not be hurt.
I have one
Yes.
question. So I can envision myself very similar to Dr. Shelton's experience that you shared earlier of like going into a new job.
Yeah.
And pretty much I'm going to write by myself because I don't know any of you people and
Yeah.
I don't know how to approach you all.
Yes.
Power dynamics and all that stuff. So I guess, I don't know if there's an actual answer to this, but when I think about talking about vulnerable topics, specifically as women in academia, it does take vulnerability to sit in front of someone else and say, you know, this is a phenomenon that I've been experiencing and I would love to write about it, because in my like worst case scenario brain, if I go and say like, you know, Dr. Guyotte, I experienced this today, like this was really terrible, and you'd just be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then that's just the end of the conversation. Or that wouldn't happen with you, obviously. But
it could have.
Right, it could have. Or if you go to a new place and you do want to sit down and kind of have these vulnerable conversations about it, it takes, how did you do that? How did you navigate from writing papers by yourself for 2 years to now you're gonna kind of take that step towards collaboration?
So I didn't just write by myself my first couple of years. The collaborative works that I had after I graduated were with people that I had gone through my doc program with that I knew well. And then because of the nature of the Qual program, Kelly and I are constantly around one another anyway, right? Like we have meetings, we're talking about courses, and I also will say that by virtue of me coming in and Kelly being established relative to like the courses that I was being asked to teach, I was already kind of required, if you will. I mean, I guess I didn't have to, but it would have been stupid not to have done it. But like, I mean, just reaching out to Kelly and being like, are you willing to share with me like information that you have relative to this course that I've never taught, that you've taught several semesters? And those sorts of interactions, I think, were like the foundation, because every time I would ask either Kelly or Aaron, I mean, their response was automatically, immediately like, oh, of course, absolutely, like here are all these things. And like if I couldn't find something and there was like something on Kelly's syllabus and I would be like, I don't know where this is at, then I would be like, you know, I cannot find this thing, will you help? And she would always be like, oh yeah, totally, like here's this thing and then here's like 5 more things. And so like I think our relationship started in some respects with like me already having to like reach out, and it always being, the interaction always being very positive, very productive, very supportive. And so by the time I went to her office and was like, yo, like this thing is happening, I don't know at that point that I was really concerned about there being like repercussions or dismissal, because even if Kelly's response had been like, I have not experienced that, the response would have been, no, I haven't, like what's happening? Like that would have been the response, right? But it's funny because I didn't immediately go to Aaron, even though like he is the department head and he's also a Qualleague and so on. And so I think like even unconsciously maybe like I realized even before I realized it was gendered, like I think I realized it was gendered. Because when Kelly and I both were like, Aaron, have you experienced this thing? He was just like, no. Of what do you speak? And we were just like, but it was, it's really important, and I think this was actually advice you gave me when I was coming into, because we both came straight out of a doc program into a tenure track position.
In the same institution.
Yes, from the same institution, in fact. And we had a lot of friends in common, but we'd actually never met, which was really kind of fascinating. Like I think some of the advice that you gave me was like don't be a hermit, like try to be visible, try to like interact with people. And I will say in my first semester, especially since like I was brought in as someone who has like an extensive background of interviewing and focus groups, a lot of people wanted to work with me. And Aaron, in fact, was the one that was like, you don't work with people your first year, like you figure out where to park. You figure out like where you're living, like you figure those things out and you tell them that I said so. And so that first year, I felt very able to just be like, I don't owe you an explanation because my department head has said no. And so, I don't even know who this person is. Sorry. But I think part of it was just like, by the time that we got around to talking about this collaboration, we had already had enough interactions that I wasn't concerned about censure or rejection or misunderstanding. Because again, like, I mean, even if they respond, because I mean, there have been moments I've been like, blah, 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 question mark, and then she's like, no. But then there's not like a, what are you doing in my office? It's more of like a, what happened, or are you okay? Or, and we both like, we'll call or text one another and just be like, this thing happened. I need to talk about it before I do something illegal. And so we'll talk it out. But yeah, I think like your first year is really, because like your first year is, it's charming because you don't know any of the politics or any of like the relationships or lack of relationships between people, and so it very much is like a honeymoon period in some respects, but it also is very daunting because like you don't, like because you don't know those things, right? And so it made more sense if I was going to do collaborations to do them like with people that I already had prior relationships with. But by the time we got around to this project, I mean, I felt like at that point, like relationally and professionally, we were in a place to where, I mean, I was very willing to be like, people keep crying in my office, this is normal.
Well, and I did the same thing, you know, when I got here. I think maybe we got similar advice. You know, I had been warned, like, people are going to come, they're going to knock on your door, they're going to want to talk with you, they're going to want to collaborate on you, people are going to collaborate with you, they're going to want to have you on dissertation committees.
You're very popular as a methodologist.
and so the advice that I think Erin shared with me, and maybe I passed on to Stephanie, was say no. You know, protect yourself, protect your time, establish yourself. And I know that might seem counter to the advice that we've been giving all day today, but it was very important because I continued the collaborations I had going on. So for my first 2 years, I was finishing up other collaborations, a lot that extended from the project that I had been working on previously, while I was trying to get a feel for what, and this is before you were here, for who all these other people were.
I was still taking classes.
The type of work they were doing, so that when it came to time for me to start collaborating with folks here, I had a very good idea of how those collaborations were going to go. So yes, it's slightly counter to, you know, what we've talked about, but also I think it's also very consistent in that we have always entered in collaborations very thoughtfully, very intentionally. And so it was not my desire with the methodological work that I do to jump right into things. But also, I know people, and I know we both know people, who that is not who they are as methodologists.
Yep.
That it was actually important for them to kind of start getting into projects and start, because it's a different type of collaboration.
Yep. And I also think some of it has to do too with like what kind of relationship you have with your dissertation, because I will say that I like the whole mythological slaying of the beast. I'm so exhausted, I can't function, I haven't taken a shower in 3 weeks. That was not my experience. I genuinely enjoyed writing my dissertation. When I finished writing my dissertation, I had such greater respect for my participants than I'd even had before writing my dissertation. And so when I got here, I was very eager to return to that data, because you can't write about everything in your dissertation. Like, everything you collect can't go in your dissertation, because nobody's going to read a 1,000-word dissertation. I mean, a 1,000-page dissertation. It should be not. It should be more than 1,000 words. And so like I didn't really feel like a loss. It wasn't like I wasn't being productive. It wasn't like I was like sitting like all alone. Like, golly gee, I wish I had a friend. Like I had stuff to do, and stuff I was excited to do. But I know other people who like they finish their dissertation and they're like, I am done with that. And so then they're very eager to move on to a different project and potentially to collaborate with other people, because they don't want to go back to the dissertation work and explore that in different ways. But I was really excited to do that. And so I was fine those first couple of years. I was still being very productive. And much of it was by myself, but it also was because of the nature of the work that I was doing. The data was data that I had collected. Kelly's experience was a little different, simply because her dissertation data was couched within a larger project that involved a lot of other people. But I think that's part of it too. I think part of it is, especially if you're coming straight from a doc program into a tenure track position, like what is the relationship that you had with your dissertation data because I think some of that's going to guide the decisions that you make and the collaborations that you do or do not engage in relative to like moving forward in that first year or so. You shouldn't hate your dissertation, I just want to say that.
So, since you guys are on the qual side, do you guys have people from quant practices who want to do like a mixed method collaboration with you guys? And so, how have you, like, how do those collaborations look like, first of all, and how have you navigated some of those kinds of things? Because I feel like even like how you approach it is very different, and like working with those kinds of people. So.
Well, I collaborated with, there was a professor who used to be here and is now moved on, but he was doing some work, and it was a very quantitative study that was taking place on campus. And they had an interest in bringing in some qualitative components. There were questions that they were not able to answer strictly through the quantitative means that they were using. And so we had been friendly with one another, and he reached out and we had a meeting and decided, he invited me to come on and kind of form a qualitative cohort to this project that they've been working on. And I think in the end it ended up being very successful. There were certainly differences, and not only in the data, and the analysis and that type of thing, but just in how we like see and understand the world. So for me, it was really generative because it allowed me to kind of push myself and to see things differently. And also, I like to think that maybe it was for him as well, and for the students that we brought into the project. So. But we did write together. We wrote kind of a mixed methods piece, which is really the first and only mixed methods thing that I've written. And it isn't necessarily something that I would have written on my own, and it's not like my voice, I don't think necessarily. But it was an interesting project. It was an interesting process. I've been very intentional not to take on projects that aren't ones that I want to do. So even as it was a little out of my wheelhouse in some respects, I enjoyed it, and it pushed me. So you have to navigate like different languages. Mm-hmm. When you're working across paradigms, you have to navigate different epistemologies and ontologies, and sometimes conflicting ones. And so there are tensions that are there, and some of those tensions you can work through and resolve, but a lot of those tensions are necessarily unresolvable, that they're just always going to be there. And so you either have to kind of move with it and embrace it, or excuse yourself and move on to something else.
And different journal norms too.
Yeah, like it's so many different norms to negotiate. Mm-hmm.
I will say it's really important. It's been, I get tapped to do mixed methods work a lot because of my interviewing and focus group background. And I actually do a good bit of government contract work as well, which is always mixed methods. It is very important to me. I came out of a culture where qual and quant were very bifurcated and very oppositional. Because that's the way that I was acculturated as a doc student, I thought, well, maybe this is just like the norm. Like qual and quant people are just going to be in this epic battle for forever, right? And when I went on the job market, I would go to different campuses and it would be the same. And I'm just like, all right, like, can't we all just get along? Well, apparently not. Apparently qual and quant people cannot. And it was a little baffling for me because we've had this conversation, like I was quantitatively trained. I shifted to qual for a range of personal and professional reasons. But when I came here, I'm going to be really frank to say I was not super excited about applying for a job in Alabama. That's not something that like a queer identifying person sees and is like, yeah, Alabama, let's do that. But I came here, and one of the things that struck me right off the bat was that the quant and qual people were like an actual like program together. And I remember from my job talk, the quant people came, and I will say that at other job talks I had done at other institutions, quant people had come as well, but they had basically been there to like punch holes in my argument. And I'm just like, all right, like, look, like, I speak your language too, let me just, like, shut you down. But, like, here, like, people were here because they were genuinely interested. And, like, so, like, Stephanie Wind and Yunjing Choi were there, and, like, and they were just like, yeah, like, this is, like, fascinating stuff. And I'm just like, where are your obnoxious, mean-spirited questions? They're not here. And I remember I had a cold, and Yunjing went and, like, got me hot tea from Starbucks, and I'm just like... And so, like, one of the selling points of this institution, frankly, was the genuinely collegial relationship between the qual and quant people. So I say that to say that when you're negotiating a mixed methods partnership, it is very important to make sure that there is genuine respect on both sides methodologically, because it has sometimes been the case that quant people basically want to, like, tack a qual person on to be able to say that they're doing mixed methods, and that's actually not what's happening at all. Or, like, they'll want to do interviews, but really it's just verbalized surveys, and it's like, that's not qual. And so making sure that even if there is not, like, knowledge across the two, there's a genuine commitment to understanding across the two. Because if you don't have that, it's not going to go well generally. But in terms of how that works, it really depends on the point of the project, and it depends on the point of the data. Typically, when I'm involved, it's very similar to what Kelly described, where they'll have some sort of, it's typically for me interview data, and they'll have collected it and they won't know what to do with it. They're like, we have these things and people say good things, but we don't know what to do with things. And so then, like, I come in and one of my expectations is that if we're going to work together, we're going to have a conversation about what this process is going to look like. And I'm not going to go through and code this data for you. You're going to learn how to do this inductively, and you're going to do this with me. And we're going to have this conversation. And that's usually a pretty good, like, litmus test, if you will, because, you know, if people are genuinely interested and there's, like, actual respect on both sides, they're going to be like, okay, great, like, this is wonderful. But there's other times it's like, no, that's like, I don't, you know, I really, like, I was hoping that you could do that. And I'm just like, and no. That's going to be a no from me. And you learn pretty quickly, like, who the people are that are invested in those partnerships. Christine Jolivet, who is, she's one of the endowed chairs, she's in special and multiple abilities. She and I have done a lot of collaboration. And I feel like in many respects I've almost, like, pulled Christine over to the qual side, if you will, because, like, she's building a new doctoral program, and I was telling Kelly today, she's intentionally building the qual certificate into the course requirements, because she's realized through the work that she and I have done together that she really, like, her research is enriched by knowing how to navigate qualitative research. And so those are the kinds of collaborations you want. You don't want to feel like as a quant person you're just there to crunch numbers. You don't want to feel like as a qual person you're just there to go through and code some interview data. Neither of those things are productive or meaningful for anybody. Yep. If you're working with qual people, the qual people should not be anti-quant. If you're working with quant people, they should not be anti-qual. Like, that should be, like, the beginning requirements.
Any other questions?
So we are doctoral students, and if we intend to, for instance, if we intend to collaborate, and we really don't know the sense of direction, is it okay to reach out to, I don't know, because people come from, like, different departments, how do we go about it? Like, who do we kind of reach out to? Kind of like, who can be like our contact point to guide us through the whole process? Since maybe, let's say we are all novices, we don't really know how that space is being navigated. So how can we, how can we go about the process?
In terms of building collaborations with other students or with faculty, or
like students.
Oh, with other students,
right.
Yeah.
How do you learn to navigate that? Like, how do you learn to negotiate that? So I will say, I'm working with a project. It has, there's five students. They had a very specific project they wanted to accomplish. and they came to me, and there were very specific reasons methodologically that they came to me specifically. And so at the end of the day, my role has really just been to like, I don't know, be the goalkeeper, I guess. You know, like, Mona, you haven't turned this in. This is a deadline that we agreed on. Nancy, I'm reminding you that like by the next week, whatever. And like, I'll be like final author on this manuscript. Like they've worked out their author order. They've done the bulk of that work. I will say that it is very likely if you reach out to a faculty member to try to mitigate and negotiate those things, a no is kind of likely just because like faculty members are less inclined to devote a lot of time and energy to something that they're not necessarily going to be directly involved in. But I do think that if there is a faculty member like in your department, for example, that you really respect their work or you think that they do really good work, you might just like check in with them, like, I mean, just schedule like a 15-minute appointment and be like, how do you negotiate things? How do you navigate things? But the other thing too is just like, if there's somebody in your department that you know that you want to work with, because the first time I ever wrote with a fellow doc student, I reached out to her because I trusted her. I knew that she was smart. I knew that she was very serious. I knew that like if we agreed to deliver X, Y, and Z, she would deliver X, Y, and Z. She was a couple of years behind me, in fact. And I just reached out to her and was like, her name is Megan, and we've actually written together several times since then. But I was like, Megan, like, I have this project. And the project was, she was very extensively steeped in like whiteness and disrupting whiteness in educational spaces. And the data that I had was this focus group that had just like gone to hell. They had just started fighting with one another, but what it amounted to was that they just refused. There was a single queer person of color, and the rest of the people in the group, white and people of color, refused to talk about queerness in relation to race. And I knew that I did not have the theoretical background to do that work well, but I knew that Megan did, and I knew that Megan, as a fellow doc student, was going to be more likely to work with me on this project than me going and finding like a faculty member. And I will also say, like, I mean, some faculty members are more scrupulous than others. And so I was also not willing to work with a faculty member. This was my data that was going to insist that they be first author with my data. And so that was another reason that I specifically wanted to work with a doc student. And so this was someone that I knew, respected, trusted, that also had this knowledge base that I lacked. And so I explained to her, like, this is what the data is. I definitely want to write about this thing, but I don't know these things. And so we like met up at a coffee shop. I shared with her the transcript, talked with her about like where I was thinking about sending it. She had some other ideas of other places I could potentially send it. We talked about like deadlines, because I wanted to try to get the paper out before, I was trying to get the paper at least like to like a revise resubmit stage before like I was like on the job market. And so we talked about that. We figured out if that was realistic, if that was doable on both of our parts. And then we started, like, we set up a Google Doc and we started to like co-draft. And just like we talked about here, like I did the bulk of like building the skeleton because I was the one who would engage with this data. I was the one who was there for like the moment that it happened. But then she would come in and be like, she was especially helpful like with the theoretical framing and then with the analysis through the theoretical lens, because she would be like, yeah, but like you don't mention this, or what about this, or whatever. And so when we felt like we finally got to a place where like we had played with it as much as we could play with it, we both had we had like faculty members in common relative to our committee. So we asked them if they were willing to read it. The answer for each of them was like a very polite no. They were too busy. And so we found another doctoral student that we sort of trusted, who was a little senior to us. We're like, would you be willing to read this, give some feedback? And so she was willing. And so then we sent it off to a journal. We got a revise resubmit, and then so then it's like a whole new thing of like figuring out like how to do the revise resubmit, how to write the letter to the editors explaining the revise resubmit. And she was really essential to that process because a lot of it was still pertaining to the things that she had greater knowledge in. But like it was very similar to what we described here. Like I kind of pitched the idea to see if she was interested. And then once she was on board, we set up like timelines and all. And there was an understanding from the very jump that like I was going to be first author because this was my concept, this was my data, that, you know, this was, you know, formed from my initial analysis, but that she was going to be a really important part of that paper. And so she and I have written together since then because we had such a productive first time. And I'm going to emphasize, like, she and I we were both smart and motivated people, but we both ultimately were kind of clueless too. And sometimes the measure of a journal, I will say, a journal editor, is like they'll recognize that you really are like a doc student. And so the editor of this journal, and this was like a really high tier journal, but like the editor of the journal was like very helpful in just being like, this is the way that I want you to approach this. This is like, and this is the way that I need for you to explain or to come at this or whatever. Because we got the initial email and we're like, yay, revise, resubmit. And then we're like, what do we do now? And so I emailed the editor without expecting a response. And then she was very kind and responded back and was like, all right, look, this is the way that this works. Because I think she realized like we had a really great idea, but we were not entirely clear about how to execute it. And like faculty, I think, are very invested in you and in your trajectories, but at the end of the day, like everybody's a human. And so like that's the way that I negotiated and navigated that. And ultimately we didn't involve faculty because faculty just weren't able to be involved. And it was very productive and worthwhile overall. And I think we're both doing pretty well in life right now, she and I.
I think logistically, just going to events like these, and you know, listening in class when you talk about research, seeing what other people are doing, but then thinking like logically about who are the people that have the knowledge that I need or that I think would be important to bring to this project, and where might those people be? You know, is there a specific department that does that type of work? Is there, you know, do you know someone on campus that works with those theories that can maybe point you to somebody else? So in being strategic about where you place yourself and also being strategic about where you look just to get the collaborations off the ground. I think that would be kind of like in terms of like a starting point, you know, helpful in kind of getting that going. And, you know, reaching out to faculty, but also realizing that faculty we wear a lot of hats. And there's only so many hours in the day, and as much as sometimes it pains us to say no to things, and sometimes it really does pain us, you know, to say no. Sometimes we just have to.
There's a writing group that, speaking of Christine Jolivet, she sponsors a writing group for doctoral students, and they meet once or twice a month at Heritage House, I think. And so, I mean, that's another good place to potentially like meet people. Because then you know those are people who are motivated and driven to do the work because they're showing up for writing group too. And then because you're both showing up potentially for writing group, like you have a committed, dedicated time that you're able to work together anyway.
And that's part of the reason why we're organizing these
things,
which is...
No, these things are important. They're incredibly important.
Dr. Jolivet is so nice too.
Oh,
Christine's
really
like, I mean, she's angelic. She's
awesome.
amazing. And you will never have a greater cheerleader.
Well, it is 12:57, and I know I told our speakers up to 1, so I want to be respectful of their time. So if you could give them a round of applause for thank you so much for all of this.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, we learned while you were doing your speed dating that your little Valentines do this.
Oh, cute.
So you can fix our.
Yeah.
And we got some goodies, some Qual
you
swag.
make Qual.
So please come grab some.
Setting high bars for speakers.
I know, seriously.
Since you guys are here, Dr. Shelton will be doing a workshop on qualitative interviewing the exact same day, exact same time next week.
Yep.
And then there's going to be a quant talk the week after that. And the people left, but Dr. Wind and Dr. Cook, who are sitting on that couch, will be our speakers 2 weeks from now.
Yay.
So you guys get, advance notice of all these talks.
Yeah.
So we will be sending out flyers and those kinds of things. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thanks for organizing, Mona. We have keychains with flashlights. We also have little ribbons that go on the bottom of your conference badges, and then there's some pens as well. Yeah, the flashlights are handy. I use that when I walk my dog.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually kind of bright.
Good idea.